Hi, this is Gabe from fluentforever.com. At this point, you've seen and heard all of the vowels and consonants of Hebrew. If you're using one of my trainers, it will take you through each of the sounds you've encountered here, teach you the spellings that produce those sounds, and push them into your long-term memory. And if you're not, that's okay too. The goal of these videos was to give you a passing familiarity with all of the available sounds, so that when you study them in detail, they're not going to be totally new to you. That'll make them easier to learn. In either case, since you're now familiar with all the sounds in Hebrew and their IPA symbols, I want to spend some time discussing Hebrew's spelling rules. Basically, how to go from what you read to what you say out loud. Now, for the most part, this is going to be pretty simple. Hebrew is very phonetic, and so once you memorize what the letters look like, you're going to be able to read most words as long as the vowels are provided. The purpose of this video is to fill in some of the less intuitive aspects of the spelling system, so that once you finish memorizing which letter is which, you'll be able to accurately read all words rather than just most words. We'll divide this video up into a few parts. We'll begin by discussing a few consonants that are silent in Hebrew. Then we'll talk about chet and hey and how they act at the ends of words. Then we'll cover Hebrew's complex and occasionally silent vowel, the schwa. And then we'll cover a couple of ah vowels that don't always behave the way you might expect. So first, silent consonants.
Usually, when someone mentions silent consonants in Hebrew, they're talking about aleph and ayin.
We mentioned them back in the last video, when we talked about vowel combinations and long vowels.
In words like simtaot, pe'amim, ra'ah, be'er.
In all of these cases, the main function of those alephs and ayins is that they're acting as placeholders for the vowels that come underneath them. Now, there are a few other letters that are sometimes silent and sometimes not. Those letters are yud, vav, and hey, which, when we covered them back in video 2, made a y sound, a v sound, and a h sound. So let me show you the Hebrew word meaning my mouth.
It's pi.
Now this word is relatively simple. There are only 2 letters and 1 diacritic.
We have a pei, which makes a p sound. We have a single dot under it, known as chirik, which makes an I sound. And then we have a yud, which isn't making any sound at all.
So why is that yud there? What's going on here is something known as mater lectionis. This is a Latin phrase that's translated literally as mother of reading. When we have vowels written in, that yud is not very useful. It's just a silent letter, and if you've ever tried to explain to an English learner why knife has a K in the beginning and an E at the end, you may know just how annoying silent letters can be. But if you drop the vowels out of the equation, suddenly silent letters can be a lot more useful.
The yud at the end of pi.
That silent letter is almost a guarantee that you're looking at an E vowel of some sort at the end of that word. Here are 4 words without any vowels.
Ki, shir, mitz, tit.
And in all 4 of these cases, that silent yud is really helpful in helping you figure out what that vowel is going to be. That's not to say that seeing a yud in the middle of a word is a 100% guarantee that you're going to have an E vowel.
There are words like chaya, for instance, where the yud isn't silent at all.
You're getting a y consonant with an a vowel in this case. But I'd say that 95% of the time, a yud in the middle of a word is going to be a silent indicator that there is an E vowel coming right before it. And that is kind of useful in a language that doesn't generally write down its vowels. One thing to point out here, because that yud is redundant when you are writing out vowels, people will sometimes cut out that redundant yud altogether.
Instead of seeing kibbutz, for instance, you'll sometimes see a shortened spelling, kibbutz, instead.
There are 3 other letters that can function as mater lectionis, but the rest of them range from slightly less useful than yud to almost useless.
The slightly less useful category would be a vav or a final hey.
Final hey is usually going to indicate a final a sound, but sometimes can be an e sound. It's more unpredictable than yud.
Vav in the middle of a word is usually o, sometimes u, and not that frequently it's used as a consonant v.
And then comes the almost useless category.
That would be final aleph, which is often a or e, and sometimes o or e.
It's honestly not telling you much of anything. Mater lectionis letters are what happens when a language begins with an alphabet that's entirely made of consonants, and then over time starts to realize that vowels are kind of handy, and so maybe we could make some of those consonants do double duty as vowels. For our purposes, it's mostly important that you know how to recognize when you're looking at a silent mater lectionis, or when you're looking at a real consonant that you need to pronounce. And when you put vowels in, that turns out to be pretty easy. If you see one of these particular letters, aleph, hey, or yud, and there's no vowel underneath, then you're looking at a mater lectionis, and it's going to be silent. Vav is a special case in that it's always 100% clear what it's doing, at least when you're adding in all the vowels.
There is a special Vav for O,
It looks like this with a dot on top.
and there is a special Vav for U.
It looks like this with a dot in the middle. If you see either of those, then that letter is functioning as a vowel.
You just say O or U, and there's no V consonant at all.
And if you see a Vav in any other circumstance, then it is being used as a V consonant. So, now let's move on to a couple of consonants that behave a little weirdly with vowels.
Hey and Chet.
We'll start with Chet. This is a consonant that we introduced back in video 2.
It makes a Ch sound, as in Cheder or Simcha.
When it shows up in the beginning or middle of a word, it acts normally, which is to say that you pronounce the consonant, that Ch sound, and then you pronounce the vowel that comes underneath it.
You have a Ch and a E, and you get Che, Cheder. You have a Ch and a and you get Cha, Simcha.
It's only at the very end of a word that it can get a little weird. If you see a word where the last letter is a Chet, and there is a single line underneath it,
This is a vowel known as patach, and it makes an A sound.
in that particular case, you're going to pronounce the vowel first and then the consonant.
You have a Ch and a, and you get Ach. Here's Efroach, and here's Shatiach. And in both of these words, the last sound is Ach.
In modern spoken Hebrew, hey is a bit simpler. Generally, if you see a hey with any kind of a vowel at the end of a word, then you just make that a sound.
This gives you words like tamua or gavoa,
The last sound in that word isn't ha,
as in tamuha,
it's not ah with a h at the end,
as in tamuah,
it's just ah.
tamua.
The only time hey gets a little more complex is a really particular case, when it comes at the end of a word without a vowel and with a little dot in the middle.
In words like la,
If you listen carefully to that word, you can hear a little tiny H sound at the end.
la.
This isn't universally done. Many speakers will just skip that h sound. But pronouncing it is relatively common, and so you should know that it happens. And the way that Hebrew tells you that you should actually pronounce that consonant is by sticking a dot inside the letter.
This, for instance, is gina.
No dot, no vowel, and so no sound. It's a silent mater lectionis letter. But with that dot, you'll pronounce the letter, even if it's at the end of a word without another vowel.
La.
The one last thing I want to emphasize about hey is that it is very frequently silent. I suspect because it's such a weak, hard-to-hear consonant sound, speakers will sometimes drop it altogether. Here's a word with a hey in the middle.
Nehedar, where if it's carefully pronounced, you'll hear nehedar. But if it's more sloppily pronounced, that nehe in the beginning turns into ne'e. It's a long e vowel, and you get ne'edar.
We have two last topics to discuss, and both of them have to do with vowels. We'll start with the schwa vowel. It looks like two dots arranged vertically, and much of the time it doesn't have any sound at all. You'll go from one consonant directly to the next one.
As in dvora and sfina.
And as something of a side note, if you see a schwa vowel combined with another vowel, they're both under the same letter, like in nehedar, then just ignore that schwa vowel completely. It doesn't have any effect in pronunciation for modern Hebrew. Now, let's go back to what happens when you see schwa on its own. About half the time, though, that schwa is going to make an eh sound.
Like in levena.
So how do you know whether to make an eh sound or whether to keep a schwa silent? And unfortunately, the answer to this involves a lot of memorization. There are around 15 specific situations in which a schwa sounds like an eh, and I think rather than going through every single one of those situations in detail, which sounds super overwhelming, it would be more useful to show you how all of those situations can be grouped into 4 big categories. It should be a bit more manageable. So, our rule is going to be that a schwa is silent unless your word falls into one of these 4 categories. Category 1 is going to feel the most natural. You have a letter with a schwa underneath, and the next letter either has the same sound,
As in shachechu.
there's a ch with a schwa under it, and then there's another ch right after it. Or it has a sound that's produced in the same place in your mouth.
As in lamadeti.
There's a d with a schwa under it, and then a t. It's made in the same spot in your mouth. D, t. The rule is here because without it, you'd have to say something awful like shachachu or lamadeti. It's really hard to make 2 similar sounds in a row with nothing in between them. And so we stick in that eh sound. And so that is category 1. For all the 3 remaining categories, we're only going to talk about what happens when there's a schwa under the first letter of your word. That's the only situation we're talking about. Okay? So category 2. There are 5 letters that will always force that schwa to be an sound. So if your word starts with one of those special 5 letters, you can be guaranteed that the schwa is going to produce an sound.
Those letters turn out Yud, Lamed, Mem, Nun, and Resh, as in Yerakot, Levena, Mechonit, Neshika, and Reidat Adama.
Again, don't memorize the letters now, just know that there are 5 letters that guarantee that the schwa makes an sound. Category 3. There are 4 letters that are important single-letter prefixes in Hebrew. I'll give you an example of what I mean.
This is the word Rosh. It means head, but if you add a be right in the beginning, you get berosh, in the head.
That be prefix does the same thing as the English preposition in, and it's always pronounced as be, even though it's spelled with a schwa and it's not one of our special 5 letters from category 2. And so category 3 is just a handful of letters that usually have a silent schwa.
In words like brosh or briut,
But if they're being used as grammatical prefixes,
as in berosh,
then you're going to pronounce that schwa.
Category 3 prefixes include be, meaning in, ve, meaning and, ke, meaning as or like, and te, which is used to put verbs in the future tense.
Our last category, category 4. For any category 4 words, you're going to pay attention to the second letter. If that second letter is a hey,
As in behemot,
or one of these silent letters,
aleph or ein, as in be'er, or pe'amim.
then you're going to pronounce the schwa under the first letter as e. And that is all for the extremely complicated schwa. We have one last thing to chat about, and that is the kametz diacritic, which looks like a short capital T. This diacritic is usually pronounced as an a vowel.
As in yamim, adon, or gadol.
Unfortunately, sometimes it's pronounced as an o vowel instead.
As in tzohoraim, or chochma.
Practically speaking, there are no reliable rules for telling you whether a kametz is going to sound like a or o. So when you learn words that use that diacritic, you're just going to have to memorize whether that vowel is pronounced o or a. But if you have to guess, choose a. It's much more common. And with that, we're all done. To quickly review, in this video, we talked about 4 big spelling-related topics. We began with some silent letters.
There was aleph, as in simtaot, and ein, as in pe'amim.
These consonants are always silent and generally function as vowel placeholders. We then chatted about these silent mater lectionis letters.
Yud, vav, hey, and aleph.
All of these can help indicate the presence of a vowel and are really handy when you're reading Hebrew texts that don't have any vowel diacritics. When your texts do have vowels, then you know you're looking at a silent mater lectionis letter when they look like this.
For Yud, Hey, and Aleph, there aren't any vowels underneath. And for Vav, there's a dot up top for an O vowel and a dot in the middle for U.
Our second topic covered the consonants chet and hey, both of which can act a little weirdly at the ends of words. If you see a word where the last letter is a chet and there is a single line underneath it,
then you're going to read that as ach, as in efroach, and shatiach.
with hey, if you see a word with the last letter is a hey with any kind of a vowel underneath, you'll ignore that h sound and just say,
As in tamua, or gavoa.
We also mentioned how hey is frequently silent, especially as an unvoweled mater lectionis letter at the end of a word. But Hebrew diacritics can help you figure out when to pronounce it and when not to by adding a little dot in the middle of the letter when it's pronounced at the end of a word.
As in la.
Our third topic was the extremely complicated schwa vowel. This vowel looks like 2 dots arranged vertically, and it's silent except when your word falls into one of 4 categories. Category 1, you have a letter with a schwa under it, and the next letter either has the same sound or a similar sound.
As in shachechu, or lamadeti.
In those cases, the schwa makes an sound to separate the 2 similar sounding letters. Categories 2, 3, and 4 all talk about what happens when the schwa is under the very first letter in your word, and only in that case. For category 2, we talked about 5 special letters that force that schwa to make an sound.
They were Yud, Lamed, Mem, Nun, and Resh, as in Yerakot, Levena, Mechonit, Neshika, Reidat Adama.
For category 3, we talked about a handful of grammatical prefixes.
There was be, meaning in, ve, meaning and, ke, meaning as or like, and te, which is used to put verbs in the future tense.
If you're using one of those prefixes, then your schwa is going to make an eh sound.
As in berosh.
And then there was category 4,
If that second letter is a hey, as in behemot,
or one of the silent letters, aleph or ayin,
as in be'er, or pe'amim.
then you're going to pronounce the schwa under the first letter as eh. And that was it for schwa. Our final topic was the unpredictable kamatz vowel. This diacritic is usually pronounced as an a vowel,
As in yamim, or gadol,
but occasionally it's pronounced as an o vowel.
as in tzohoraim, or chochma.
You'll just need to memorize which vowel to pronounce when you learn a word that uses that diacritic, but anytime you need to guess, choose a. And that wraps up our series on Hebrew pronunciation. If you need a hand in memorizing all this stuff and training your ears to hear it all accurately, then grab a Hebrew pronunciation trainer from my website linked below. You'll have all this memorized within 3 or 4 weeks. I hope you had fun, and I'll see you next time.